Greetings, mighty Africans. This is Makonnen Tendaji, the Political Education Director for the African Black Coalition. Welcome to the final edition of PE with ABC of the year 2020. Today, we will be discussing the Black family, examining the impact of institutional racism on Black family life. Let's go ahead and get straight to it. This is an interesting or an intriguing topic, I should say, and it's one that is highly complex and requires high levels of nuance and information and statistics and history. We simply cannot um, step into a room one day and have a conversation on the Black family and leave that room, having fully encompassed the problems, the conditions, and the history of the Black family. So, and this is something that sociologists in particular have debated for years, this critical question of, is the family the engine that drives the car, or is it the car that is being driven by the engine? In other words, does the family determine the economic status of individuals, or does the economy determine the structure of a family? That comes from the book The Black Family by Robert Staples, a pioneer in sociology. Um, and it's this question that we will be wrestling with during this analysis. But first, some critical definitions need to be learned and studied before we can engage in this topic. So the first definition is institutional discrimination. This refers to laws, regulations, policies, and informal practices of organizations or institutions that result in differential adverse treatment or subordination of racial and ethnic minorities. A major impediment to the development of viable strategies to counteract institutional racism has been the failure of many Black leaders and scholars to recognize or acknowledge the role of unintentional or structural discrimination. And then we have institutional racism and structural transformations. Notice the language that we use on this topic. We're not dealing with the character or the morality or the biology or the culture of Black people when we're discussing Black families, because that would be a flawed analysis in which we're leaving out the very institutional and structural ways in which they are impacted in this particular context in family life, right? We contend that institutional racism has contributed significantly to the erosion of the social and economic well-being of Black families over the past 2 decades. More specifically, we argue the sharp increases in unemployment, poverty, and one-parent families among Blacks were due in large part to the structurally discriminatory effects of major economic forces and policies. In short, Black families are being subjected increasingly to discrimination by structural proxies. And some of the ways that this institutional racism manifests when structures transform are American industries such as agriculture to manufacturing, or from manufacturing to services. In the area of technology, you have automation, right? Or the idea of labor of technology being labor intensive and then shifting to capital intensive. And then you have the very shifts in sectors, entire sectors, the public sector to the private sector, right? Farm work to factory work. These are very large scale events that take place. And the data show and the history show that these large scale shifts impact Black families the most adversely. Then we have structural racism, and this is defined as the normalization and legitimization of an array of dynamics, historical, cultural, institutional, and interpersonal, that routinely advantage whites while producing cumulative and chronic adverse outcomes for people of color. It's a system of hierarchy and inequity, primarily characterized by white supremacy, the preferential treatment, privilege, and power for white people at the expense of Black, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, Native American, and Arab, other racially oppressed people. So we'll see here how Black families are systematically impacted. The major economic trends that have adversely impacted Black families are back-to-back recessions, double-digit inflation, technological changes, and immigration. And the major economic policies that have had negative effects on Black families are fiscal and monetary strategies to fight inflation, plant closings, imports, foster care, and the increasing use of block grants and per capita formulas for allocating funds to localities that are not corrected for the census undercount. You can see, even in the language and the sources that we cite, none of it um, focuses on the personal decision making or the character um, defects, right, of individual Black people. Because again, sociologists, criminologists, political scientists know that economists as well, they all know that a sound analysis does not concentrate on individuals. So we will not do the same in our analysis either, because that is um, a misdirection in terms of how we can investigate the conditions of Black family life. Untangling the web of obstacles that ensnares Black families and undermines social equity requires efforts on three fronts. Number one, reducing the structural barriers to Black economic progress. Number two, enhancing the incentives for working in the mainstream economy. And three, improving family dynamics. Progress on these fronts can involve federal, state, local, and even individual policies and practices. Structural barriers to Black progress include criminal justice policy, residential segregation, and concentrated poverty. The state of public schools in predominantly Black communities, and lingering and pernicious racial discrimination. So the notion of analysis being mistakenly concentrated on individuals and decision making and character is what we would refer to as the deficit model. And this was a perspective most popularized by the infamous Moynihan Report, 1965 Moynihan Report. The full title was "The Negro Family: The Case for National Action." And this model continues to be the predominant explanation offered by conservatives and liberals today. This perspective, also known as the blaming the victim syndrome, attributes the social ills afflicting minority and low income families to internal rather than external factors. According to this view, joblessness, poverty, and welfare among Black families are primarily caused by underclass cultural values and lifestyles, as manifested by lack of a work ethic, low educational attainment, poor work skills, and high rates of one parent families and teenage pregnancies. According to proponents of the deficit perspective, underclass values and lifestyles have taken on a self perpetuating life of their own without assistance from the white world. Thus, remedies for these problems must be sought within the Black and not white community. In short, change must be sought within the culture, the quote unquote culture of the Black poor, and not within societal institutions or by combating racism. And all of the scholarship we just referenced prior to covering the deficit model, it is in direct contradiction to the proponents of the deficit model, right? The deficit model says that poor people and poor families essentially put themselves in the positions that they find themselves in. And again, the scholarship and the data could not be further in contradiction to this idea. We absolutely reject the idea of employing the deficit model, not just in the analysis of Black family life, but in any Black life. Of course, in this particular context, we're referring to the Black family. But it's important that we also define and critically think about the deficit model and not just say, oh, don't think like that. We need to be sure we have a keen understanding of what it is exactly. The first studies of Black families emerged in the early decades of the 1900s among liberal social scientists challenging research that ignored Black families and or accepted biological theories that described them as inherently inferior. These scholars attributed the problems of Black families to social forces such as slavery, racial oppression, economic exploitation, and northward migration. So we can see here, even in the earliest studies of Black families, more often than not done by Black sociologists and scholars, they understood the inherent flaw, or the erroneousness, I should say, of using the deficit model to study and analyze family life and conditions. To say that for some, uh, for some reason, the economic social position of Black families is somehow rooted in their biology, just couldn't be further from the truth and the material reality. So early sociologists in the 1900s knew this and were able to counter those ideologies and notions with the sociological studies of their own, which proved to be crucial, as we can see the scholarship and the literature develop over time. So now we're going to review some data. I wanted to put the actual resources on a slide for you all to see, these are not, you know, all of the resources out there, but these are some good places to start, to look at some data sets and some, you know, empirical findings and things like that. We have the Pew Research Center, the Brookings Institution. Y Pulse is data specific for youth, Gen Z, and millennials. And then we have the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is the official federal level of data keeping and tracking. So now, one of the most prominent ways to measure the economic health or the economic well-being of a family is home ownership. And we can see here, according to the Congressional Joint Economic Committee report, the economic state of Black America in 2020, that the Black home ownership rate has not risen above 50% this century, while nearly 3/4 of white families own their homes. So to be clear, from the years 1999 to 2019, right, according to the US Census Bureau population survey, this is the home ownership rate by race and ethnicity of householder. We can see it hovers at just about 42%, right? Most recently in 2019. It kind of increases between 2003 and 2005, but as it says, right, it does not go above 50%. When compared to the non-Hispanic white home ownership rate, it never falls below 70%. So here's a clear indicator of again, talking about a primary way to measure the wealth and the economic well-being of families within the U.S. home ownership. We can see that Black families have never fared well in that particular area. And then you also have median wealth, right? And this is the same report saying that the median wealth of Black families is only 1/10 that of white families. The median net worth of white families is around $171,000 annually, right? Nearly 10 times the median net worth of Black families, which is only $17,150 in 2016. So you have an over $150,000 difference in Black family median net worth and white family median net worth. The median Black net worth is less than 1 year's subsistence at the federal poverty level for a family of 3. So clearly we see that this is a widespread institutional, societal crisis in terms of median family net worth along with home ownership. This is, you know, the data show clearly that, you know, personal character and decision making certainly cannot account for such egregiously wide gaps in net worth, in wealth, in home ownership. And then there's also the issue of unemployment. And this is another critical area in which a society can measure the status and the health of its economy in unemployment and labor. So between January 1972 and January 2020, just this past January, Black unemployment is consistently almost double that of white unemployment. And again, it's one thing to utilize the deficit model on an individual basis, but data does not measure individual choices in decision making. It measures societal and structural inequities and discrepancies. So here we have Black unemployment is consistently, right, double from 1972 across the 1980s, the 1990s, early 2000s, and just into the 2010s, right? It's a consistent discrepancy in unemployment rates that cannot be accounted for just on the basis of, oh, Black people just don't want to get jobs. That can't be further from the truth. And then we also have education. Racial unemployment gaps are the widest for employees without college degrees. And when this educational attainment rate is then taken into account to the unemployment rate, which is then divided among race, we will see even the unemployment rates for those who have graduated high school, those who have attended some college, which in some college would be classified as associate degrees and things like that. And then even college and up, the unemployment rate for Black people is higher, 2% higher for some college and 1% higher for college and up. Again, the deficit model is one that we can all mistakenly find ourselves employing in conversations about family life, upbringing, you know, character development. It's just critical that we remain aware of the deficit model, and we sustain that awareness, and we don't utilize it to speak on the conditions and the plight of our people and of our families, because data show clearly um, personal choices and character um, do not represent the foundation for the inequality, for the poverty that the masses of our people find ourselves in. So in reflection, we want to refer to an Amos Wilson um, quote. He says that the Eurocentric organization of American society is such that its stability depends on the dysfunctionality and near disorganization of the Black family. We included this quote here very, very intentionally because, again, when we look at the data, um, particularly the ones that are linear representation, so home ownership and unemployment, we see a consistent disorganization that juxtaposes a consistent organization. So in the case of home ownership, the trend over decades is positive, upward for white families when it comes to home ownership. And the trend is consistently downward, is consistently low for Black families. And then with unemployment, the rates are consistently double that for Black people as it is for white people. The question does not revolve around personal choices or character. The question revolves around societal organization and the lack thereof, societal resources and support, and the chronic deprivation of societal resources and support for particular populations and certain races among society. So when we reflect on the Black family and the structural and institutional ways in which we are impacted, we need to keep this idea of Eurocentric organization and dysfunctionality that Amos Wilson talks about in mind. Because again, when we refer to the deficit model that talks about inherent inferiority and biological inferiority, right? It neglects the structural and societal conditions and needs, employment, education, skills, things like that. And when we turn more towards a structural analysis, looking at the barriers that block progress, right? The economic trends and the public policies that impact families directly and impact Black families acutely, as opposed to other races of families. Um, and again, even analyzing the scholarship itself, the very language that it uses is critical for us to be aware of, because it's the sound scholarship that does not engage in the deficit model. It's the scholarship we need to be reading. And we were intentional with the particular data points that we demonstrated here because, again, a topic such as the Black family could not be adequately and wholly um, analyzed and discussed in one workshop, in one PE with ABC. It certainly requires more in-depth study. So here are some resources or some references, I should say, that provide that in-depth analysis. And of course, this isn't an exhaustive list. But again, the main takeaways here are to be aware of the deficit model, be aware of the blaming the victim syndrome, be aware of conversations in which we hear notions of personal choices and decision making actually trumping economic policy, public policy, and structural discrimination and racism, which again is illogical, is incorrect. So we need to be sure that we're aware of that. So that has been the final edition of PE with ABC of the year 2020. I am the political education director for the African Black Coalition, Makonnen Tendaji. As always, you can email me. Here it is. If you ever have any questions, comments, you would like resources, references, reading lists, please, send an email my way. You can follow us on Instagram. And before I go, if you have not yet, please do so now and tell a friend and tell another friend. Our 18th annual ABC conference is rapidly approaching, January 15th through the 18th. We have a loaded schedule um, of exciting events and experiences planned for you all. So please register today, register yesterday, register tomorrow, because it's going to be a monumental experience, definitely. So again, with that, I will wish you all peace, safety, and Black power.